If the world feels too loud today, you're in the right place. Let the sound of rain and a gentle voice help you drift off. Subscribe if calm moments like this matter to you. What time do you usually start listening? I don't know when I started doing it. Not exactly. There wasn't some moment of decision, no vow made under stars or sudden epiphany. One morning, I just noticed a bench was loose, the one near the south edge of the park, close to the playground but just out of earshot of children's voices. The back panel had shifted. One of the bolts halfway rusted through. It creaked when I sat down. No one else seemed to mind. They sat, stood, passed by. But something about the way it leaned slightly, how it weighted just a little off balance, unsettled me. So the next day, I brought a wrench, quietly. Nothing fancy. Just in my coat pocket, between a pair of gloves and a folded receipt I didn't need anymore. I came early, before the sun touched the pavement, before the dog walkers and the joggers and the mothers with strollers. I knelt down, tightened the bolt, checked the others. Nothing heroic, just enough, just care. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to. It wasn't about being known. It was about the sound it made when I sat again. Solid, certain, as if it had exhaled. I didn't plan to do it again, but a few days later, a different bench near the duck pond had a crack along one slat. Not deep, but enough for a splinter. I brought sandpaper, a small piece, folded in my pocket like something I'd forgotten to throw away. I smoothed the wood until my fingers no longer caught on it. And then I kept walking. I suppose after that it became something like a rhythm. Every week or so I'd check another. Never when people were around, early mornings mostly. Sometimes just before dusk, when the light was soft and low. I never altered the benches, never changed their color or added anything new. I just kept them whole, quietly, as if they needed to know someone was watching over them, even if they never asked. There was a kind of peace in it, this silent caretaking. Something slow, something that didn't expect thanks or notice. In a world that moves fast and loud, it felt like resistance to offer steadiness without ceremony. And maybe, without realizing it, I needed that too. A reason to move gently through the morning. A way to tend to something that didn't demand it, but deserved it anyway. I didn't keep track of how many benches I touched. I didn't need to. I remembered them not by number, but by feeling. The ones that creaked in protest, the ones that held the shape of someone who waited too long, the ones that leaned as if they'd listened too closely to every story ever told atop them. I never thought anyone noticed, and for a long time, no one did. Or if they did, they never said so, which suited me fine. It was never about being seen, it was about being there. It was a Tuesday, I think. The kind of morning where the air still holds a bit of last night's cold, and the leaves feel too still, like the trees are waiting for permission to move again. I walked a loop like I always did, from the north path toward the small clearing with the 3 curved benches, the ones that never get direct sunlight. I wasn't looking for anything. I rarely am, but as I came closer, I saw it not a loose slat, not a crooked panel, but a piece of paper, folded neatly. Tucked between 2 planks of the middle bench, I slowed down, looked around without turning my head. No one nearby. Just a couple of pigeons, half interested. The park was quiet, not unusually so, just enough to notice the difference between silence and stillness. I sat down slowly, as I always do, let my hands rest on my knees. Then, gently, I reached for the paper. It wasn't weathered. Whoever had left it had done so recently. Unfolded, the handwriting was small, careful, deliberate, black ink, no signature, just one line. To the one who fixes what isn't theirs, thank you. I read it again, then again. My first thought was that it wasn't for me. Couldn't be. I hadn't told anyone. I didn't look the part. I never left traces. But there it was. And the words sat inside me in a way that felt both foreign and known. I folded the note back slowly. Didn't take it. Just returned it to where it had been. A quiet instinct told me it wasn't meant to be removed. Just read. Just know. I sat there longer than usual. Not thinking exactly. More like listening to something between the sounds. A presence that didn't need to announce itself. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe someone else was being thanked. But something in the phrasing, in the way it was left, not pinned or taped or weighed down, felt like an echo of how I'd been moving through this place. Quietly, carefully, and now, maybe, noticed. Not for show, but for presence, for care. It didn't feel like exposure. It felt like acknowledgement. And that is a rarer kind of recognition, one that doesn't name you, doesn't pull you forward, but simply says, you're not invisible. I left the bench slowly, didn't look back, didn't rush, just walked one step softer than the last. That night I slept deeper than I had in weeks, not because I felt important, but because I felt placed. As if I belonged to something I hadn't realized was large enough to hold me. It began subtly. A week or two after the note, I noticed something strange. A bench near the eastern fence, one I'd marked in my mind for later, had already been tended to. It had a warped backrest, the wood slightly bowed, one corner starting to split. I'd meant to come back with clamps, with patience. But when I returned, the split was gone. Smoothed over, carefully. Someone had matched the stain not perfectly, but with enough care that it blended. I stopped, ran my fingers over it. It wasn't my work, that much I knew. And still, it felt familiar. Or maybe just in harmony. Like someone who knows how to speak your language without learning it. I didn't see anyone nearby. The park was its usual rhythm, birdsong woven with distant footsteps, trees rustling like pages turning. But something was different. The next week, another bench near the pond had a new bracket, a clean one. Recently installed, not rusted, not standard issue city hardware. Again, not mine. And again, no sign of who had done it. I didn't feel threatened, not even curious in the urgent way, just softened. It was a quiet relief I hadn't known I was waiting for. All this time I had believed the work was mine alone, not out of pride, but necessity. Not because I thought no one else would, but because I never imagined someone else already was. I sat on that bench for a while, hands folded, back straight. I thought of the note again, to the one who fixes what isn't theirs. Maybe it hadn't been just for me. Maybe it had been for both of us, two people moving through the same space, leaving calm behind them, without needing applause. I began walking differently after that. Not slower, not faster, but with a sense of company, as if my footsteps were part of something wider, a pattern, a care passed like a thread between quiet hands. Sometimes I'd leave something small, a spare washer, a note with no words, just an arrow drawn on paper pointing toward the next bench. Nothing loud, nothing demanding. I didn't expect replies, and yet, sometimes they came. One day, the wrench I'd forgotten near a planter was returned not to me, but tucked gently into the slats of a bench I'd just repaired, wrapped in a cloth, cleaned. Another time, a sliver of wood carved into the shape of a leaf was resting on a newly fixed armrest. No signature, no need. I took it home. It sits on my windowsill now, catching morning light. Proof, perhaps, that care travels. That the small things we tend to quietly are rarely ours alone. Someone else always sees. Maybe not right away, maybe not with words, but they see. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they walk beside us, never asking who started it, just continuing, gently. I saw her before she saw me. Late afternoon light poured through the trees, catching in her hair, setting it briefly aglow. She was sitting on the far end of the long bench near the maple grove, the one with the low dip in the middle, that I had reinforced just 2 days before. She wasn't reading, not on her phone, just sitting, upright, still, as if waiting for nothing in particular. I slowed my steps. It wasn't often I saw someone in the middle of the repair. They usually came before or after, never during. But this time, she was part of it, a part of the moment I hadn't anticipated. As I approached, she looked up, calm and unsurprised, like she had expected someone eventually. Our eyes met, and she offered a small smile, not polite, not curious, just soft. "You fixed this one," she said. No question, just a statement. Her voice was low, even, the kind of voice that doesn't rush to fill silence but sits inside it comfortably. I paused. "Yes," I said, and then, for some reason, added, "just recently." She nodded. "I come here often. Used to avoid this bench because it creaked. It felt tired, like it didn't want to hold anyone anymore." She patted the slat beside her, gently. "Now it feels different, like it can breathe again." I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't used to talking about the benches, at least not to someone sitting on one. I just stood there for a moment, unsure if I should continue on. But then she said quietly, "Thank you for not letting it go to ruin." There was no sentimentality in it, no dramatic tone, just recognition, the kind that feels like someone has looked directly at you, not through you. I nodded. That was all I could do. I didn't sit, didn't linger. I just gave a small wave as I turned to leave. She didn't watch me go, just returned her gaze to the trees in front of her. But as I walked, something in me felt lighter. Not because I'd been seen, but because something I'd done had made someone feel held, even if just by wood and bolts and attention. That night, I thought about all the benches I'd worked on, the ones I'd passed, without knowing someone like her might sit there, needing a place that didn't creak under the weight of their day. I hadn't fixed them for that reason. but maybe that's why it mattered. Not for the effort, but for the quiet comfort it offered to someone I'd never meet, or only meet once. In that way, the work continued, not just in wood, but in presence. And the benches perhaps remembered us all, each of us who needed somewhere solid to rest for a while. There's something that happens when you spend enough time with something still. It starts to speak not in words, but in patterns, in the way the grain of the wood shifts slightly in the light, in how the rust grows differently depending on where people rest their hands. You start to hear things, not with your ears, but somewhere quieter. I don't know when I stopped thinking of the benches as objects and started sensing them as something else. Witnesses? Maybe. Listeners? Holders of things left unsaid. I began sitting on them longer, after the repairs were done. Not to test them, just to be with them. And sometimes, if I stayed still long enough, I could almost feel the weight of past conversations still folded into the wood. The hurried energy of a man checking his phone between meetings, the tired lean of someone who'd been walking too long, the echo of a laugh from someone who didn't know they were being heard. The benches, remember, not specifically, not with precision, but with presence. They carry traces. The way a coat carries a scent long after the person is gone, I started running my hand across each one differently, not to check for damage, but to greet it, like you might greet an old friend who never asks questions but always makes space for the answer you're not yet ready to say out loud. One morning, I sat on a bench I hadn't repaired. Not broken, not perfect, just slightly crooked. I could have adjusted it easily, but I didn't. I sat, leaned back, and let it hold me the way it wanted to unevenly, honestly. And it struck me. Not everything needed fixing. Some things needed noticing, witnessing, respect. I'd been tending to the benches like wounds, but maybe they weren't wounds. Maybe they were maps. And each curve, each crack, each mark, a way of telling someone that they too didn't have to be perfectly aligned to be worthy of stillness. I think that's when I began listening more than doing. Not always. There were still bolts that needed tightening, wood that begged for smoothing. But there were also moments to just sit, to leave things a little off-center, to let someone else come and find the comfort in imperfection. I realized I wasn't repairing benches anymore. I was tending to spaces of pause. I was creating small invitations not to sit, but to rest. Not to stop, but to return. And maybe that's all I ever wanted to do. It was later than usual. One of those evenings where time slips quietly and you don't notice how much light you've lost until you're already outside. The park looked different at night. Not unfriendly, just quieter. Shadows replaced the familiar lines of trees and railings. And even the sound of the wind seemed softer, like it too had lowered its voice. I didn't plan to walk that night, but my hands had been restless all day, and something in me felt unfinished. I brought no tools, no sandpaper, nothing in my pockets but keys and a coin I didn't remember picking up. I walked slower than usual, taking in the benches as they appeared one by one through the dark, each like a memory returning to say, I'm still here. When I reached the last one, the one I had repaired just the week before, the one by the lamppost with the crooked halo of light, I noticed something new. Not damage, not disrepair, just something placed there, carefully. At the center of the bench sat a small thermos, the kind used for tea or coffee. Next to it, 2 paper cups, one stacked inside the other. I froze, not out of fear, but wonder. There was no note, no signature, no sign of who had left it, but something in the arrangement, the way the cups were positioned, the lid of the thermos unscrewed just enough, felt unmistakably deliberate. An invitation, not a message. I sat down slowly, letting the bench settle beneath me, its familiar weight responding to mine. I didn't touch the thermos, didn't open it, but I sat beside it for a long while, the way you might sit beside someone asleep, not speaking, just sharing space. Something about it made my chest tighten in the gentlest way. Someone had thought of me, or someone like me. Someone who came late, who listened, who touched things not to claim them but to keep them from falling further apart. I watched the light tremble above us, the leaves moving like distant hands, and I whispered, barely louder than breath, "Thank you." Not knowing who it was for. Maybe the benches. Maybe the person who'd left the thermos. Maybe just the moment itself, which had given me more than I knew I needed. I didn't take the cups, didn't open the thermos. When I left, I let it remain exactly as I'd found it. Because sometimes what's offered isn't meant to be used, only felt. And in that quiet, between 2 paper cups and the night's deep breath, I realized something. Someone, somewhere, had understood the kind of silence I live inside, and they'd answered with their own. She was sitting at the far edge of the long bench near the pond, knees drawn slightly inward, scarf tucked under her chin, the way I remembered she used to do when she was nervous. At first, I didn't believe it was her. Time does that. Softens the edges, changes the posture of a person without touching the core. But then she looked up, turned her face just enough into the light, and I knew. It wasn't a memory. It was her. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes quieter. The years between us didn't feel heavy. They just felt folded. I didn't say anything right away. I simply walked past, as if I were just anyone taking his usual route. But she noticed me. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not as me. But after a few seconds, she called out softly, "You walk here often, don't you?" Her voice hadn't changed, still deliberate. Still with that slight pause before the last word. I stopped, turned. "Most mornings," I said, "and some evenings." She nodded, not surprised. "I've seen someone working on these benches," she said, looking down at the one she sat on, fixing them quietly. Not city workers, just someone who cares. She looked back up at me. "Is that you?" I didn't answer right away, just walked closer, sat slowly, leaving space between us, not for distance, for memory to breathe. "Sometimes," I said, "not always." She smiled faintly. "This one," she said, running her palm along the wood beside her, "used to creak. I remember it. I came here a lot after everything changed. It was the only place that didn't expect anything from me." I glanced at her. "Still doesn't," I said. She nodded again. "I think that's why I keep coming back." For a while, we didn't speak. The pond shimmered in the fading light. and the world seemed to exhale around us. No questions, no explanations. Just the quiet rhythm of two people who used to know each other, now sharing a pause. Eventually she said, almost to herself, "I always thought you'd become someone who builds things." I didn't reply. But I think the bench did. It held us both without strain, without sound. And that was enough. When she finally stood, she placed her hand on the backrest gently. "Thank you," she said. Not to me directly, but to the moment, to the space, maybe even to the years between us. I watched her walk away, her coat swinging slightly with each step, just as it used to. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had arrived at something I hadn't been looking for. Not closure, not reconnection, just the quiet recognition that the past doesn't always knock. Sometimes it sits beside you, says very little, and lets you keep going. I left a wrench behind, not by accident. Wrapped in cloth, clean, placed beneath the bench near the west gate, where the wood always holds a little more warmth. It wasn't a gesture. It wasn't symbolic. It was readiness. A quiet way of saying, if you're here, and if you see what I saw, you don't need to start from nothing. The bench is here, the rhythm is here, the stillness is waiting. That morning, the park was soft with fog, the kind that quiets the city and blurs the edges of even the clearest things. I walked slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because everything in me felt full. Not heavy, just full. I visited the benches one by one, touched the wood gently, not to check for damage, but like someone touching photographs they're not yet ready to put away. Each one held a piece of something I couldn't name. A memory, maybe. A moment. A version of myself I no longer needed to carry. Near the end of the path, I paused, sat, closed my eyes, listened. The birds moved like whispers above. The wind brushed the back of my neck, and I let it. I didn't need words, not anymore. I had spoken with my hands for long enough. Let the next part be silent. I don't know if someone will pick up the wrench. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. That's not up to me. What matters is that the bench will still be there, strong, still, quietly welcoming, ready to carry someone who needs rest, or someone who needs to feel useful, or someone who doesn't yet know they belong. And maybe, years from now, someone will sit and wonder why this one doesn't creak, why it feels just a little more certain beneath them. And they won't know my name. They won't need to, because it was never about being remembered. It was about leaving something better than it was found. A place to pause, a place to breathe, a place where silence means you're allowed to be here. And that, I think, is enough.